work that you do, that is the board, on behalf of all of our students, educators, and families. It has been a great honor under you and with your team. Thank you.
Madam President, that concludes all names.
Madam President, may I have a point of personal privilege?
Go ahead, Dr. Joyner.
I'd like to, I know we don't respond to public comment, but I don't view this as a response. I view this as an opportunity for me to thank Dr. Mendia for his unselfish dedication and contribution to the school system. When I first met him and got to know him, I began to think about what the term e pluribus unum means in our country. And I began to think about how America is a composite of all of the different cultures across the world. And that because we are that composite, we're able to get the best of the many cultures that are represented in our society. And Dr. Mendia is a living example of an unselfish, ethical, intellectual, creative, and courageous individual, and a person that embodies the spirit of out of the many one, which is the whole concept of e pluribus unum. I really believe he is peerless. I think his replacement is going to be great. But he was great in a very special way because he has been able to exercise the courage of his convictions. And I'm going to miss him. I've known a lot of people in my life, and he's in that group of people that if we had more of them, we wouldn't be in the trouble that we're in now. So thank you so much for your contributions to the city. And I'm hoping that perhaps you might even help us as we struggle through the issues that we're dealing with now. So may God speed, may God bless you, and may you live a long and fruitful life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Okay.
Dr. Benitez has her hand raised.
Oh, Dr. Benitez. Oh, that's right. Now I have to look in the box where you all look very tiny.
She's tiny anyway.
Just wanted to reiterate what just said about Mr. Mendia, but I also want to add that as a school principal, I had the privilege to work with Mr. Mendia, and I was able to see his craft in the classroom with children who in first grade navigate a classroom in an artful way, in ways were independent and able to learn to read without having to have a teacher guide them knew how to teach them to be independent. To me, that was a privilege, not having that experience before. We make sure we make India a part of the coaching process at former now, and the rest is history. We made that decision. I am glad that he made the decision to accept that, support his peers, because he has done it well. So thank you, Mr. Mendia. Even know the work you've done.
Thank you, Dr. Benitez. I'll just say congratulations to Mr. Mendia. I didn't have the privilege to work that closely with him, although I saw him at conferences and other events, and we got an opportunity to speak at those. And so congratulations, and I wish you the best. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So we will move on to the action items. First being the approval of the board meeting minutes of June 10th. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Wilcox,
I move we approve the meeting minutes of June 10th.
for a second. Dr. Yarborough,
Second.
thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Mr. Wilcox, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the board meeting minutes of June 10th. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner, Dr. Joyner. We'll come back to Dr. Joyner. Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
I don't, is Mr. Musser in? I can't tell if
Yes.
that's him. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Musser.
Yes.
Okay, back to Dr. Joyner.
Yes.
Okay, Mayor Elicker. Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
thank you. And so that motion passes. I'm a yes as well. And the next item is the personnel report. Dr. Negron.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Before you, you have the personnel report that I'm asking for approval. In it, you will see that there are 3 retirements that I would like to highlight. That is Patrice Edwards, a pre-K teacher at Beecher School, retiring this Friday with 37 years of service to our district, as well as Martha Gold, a special education assistant teacher at Wilbur Cross, and Maribel Torres, a bilingual kindergarten assistant teacher at Jancy Daniels, retiring with 34 years of experience. That concludes my personal report.
Thank you, Dr. Negron. Is there a motion to approve the report? Mr. Wilcox,
I move we approve the action items of the superintendent's personnel report.
is
Second.
there a second? Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Yarborough. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the action items of the personnel report. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker.
Yes.
I am a yes as well, and so that motion passes. And we'll move on to the Finance and Operations Committee action items.
All right, thank you. We're going to have several items tonight. I'm going to be moving the authorized signers, item 3.4, and the MOU, item 4.01 separately. Is there anything else anybody would like to be moved separately? All right, hearing and seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and make the motions. The first one is, I move that we revise.
There's a hand raised, President Rivera and Mr. Wilcox.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Yarborough?
Yes, Mrs. Downer had a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Downer?
Madam Chair, yes, I would like to have the change orders.
Move separately?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
If I may ask, each one moved separately or the change orders moved as a group separately?
Each one. separate.
Okay. Can do, will do. All right, so the first thing is I move that we revise the authorized signers of the ED 099 agreement for child nutrition programs, including that we first designate Dr. Madeline Negron, Superintendent of Schools, as the person authorized to sign the agreement and to sign claims for reimbursement. Second, designate Juanita Mazik, Senior Business Director, Special Funds, as the second person authorized only to sign claims for reimbursement in the absence or incapacity of the first designated individual. And three, authorize the submission of the authorized change form.
Second.
We'll give it to Dr. Benitez. Dr. Yarborough?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the ED 099 agreement for child nutrition programs. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, and so that item passes. Please continue.
All right, second is I move that we approve the memorandum of agreement between the New Haven Board of Education and the Paraprofessional Union Local 3429 regarding the paraprofessional compensation during the 2024 Summer Learning Plan program.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the memorandum of understanding. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well, and that item also passes.
All
Mr.
right,
Wilcox?
I'm going to make a large motion now, and I will be not including the change orders on this. But I move that we approve the 14 agreements, the 15 amendments, the 4 purchase orders, the 17 contracts, and the 4 items from the Special Finance and Operations Committee meeting as listed on the agenda and as recommended by the Finance and Operations Committee.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Yarborough, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the remaining F&O items except the change orders. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. And so those items pass.
All right, I move that we approve change order 9.01, which is a change order to the contract with Cone Incorporated.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Dr. Joyner?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to make a request going forward with change orders that you have the dollar amount of the contract plus in parentheses the percentage of the contract that the change order is requesting. As an example, what is the percentage increase of this particular change order?
20%.
Okay, so that's the actual threshold for the city until we amend our own policy, which could be less but not greater than 20%. Okay, thank you for that. And that helps me to analyze how we'll vote on this. I am concerned though that we keep having change orders like this. And the problem is that either the vendor and the people on our side did not have a realistic estimate of what the cost would be. Either there was some type of contingency that we had not anticipated, which would not be anybody's fault. But if we have this in with the frequency we've had it, then it creates a problem because it makes a mockery out of the bidding process. Because what a vendor can do is create a bid and then go down the line to increase that bid with a change order. And there have been some excessive, because some of the change orders have been more than 20%. And ultimately, actually not be the lowest bidder if it's a low bid contract. And I think we have to, with great haste, make some internal corrections of contracts, possible clauses in contracts that would protect us from these bids going beyond a particular amount. And quite frankly, I would like for us to have contractual relationships that places the final payment in direct alignment with what the proposed work was and the bid was, unless there's clear evidence that there had been some unanticipated event or contingency that caused this particular vendor or any vendor to go beyond the agreed upon amount. And I think if you think about a simple example, like if you go to the movies and you know that you're going to go there and take your family and that the tickets are $12 for adults and $3 for kids. And when you get there, they tell you that it's $4 for kids and $15 for adults. Then that becomes a problem. Or if you're even doing work on your own home and you have a contracted amount for a particular job, and when you get the bill, it's 20% higher than what you agreed on. So this has implications for our having kind of expertise in our organization that can make sure that these contracts are written in such a way that it does not cause the kind of problems that we've experienced over the last several months. And in a time of fiscal scarcity, if every single vendor contract even met the threshold of 20%, that would be a 20% increase that we did not take into account when we had these contracts with vendors. And some of the excuses made about costs went up. Well, if you had a bid, you should have anticipated cost increases and given us an honest bid in the first place. And this is not a reflection of anybody on the board, but it's a reflection of our dereliction of duty when it comes to making sure that we hold vendors accountable and that we hold them to the agreement, because they hold us to our agreements. We can't go to a vendor and say, we can only pay you 80% of the face of the contract, which would be a 20% reduction. We can't do that. And it would be dishonorable to do that. So we have to do better as a district and make sure that we take care of these matters so that we can make sure that the public expenditures for education are spent in an expeditious way and in an efficient way. And I'm not trying to cast blame, but I don't think there's anything that I said that is not true and that is not consistent with good contracting and good fiscal oversight. And I think that's all I'll have to say about this entire matter as far as the change orders is concerned. And I yield my time.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner, Ms. Downer, and then Dr. Yarborough.
So my question is, what happened? Is this the one with the vandalism where it cost the city the $38,000? Are we going after the person who vandalized the elevator? Is there something in play whereas we can go after this money? Also, you know, I could echo Dr. Joyner also. Shouldn't be the norm that we come up here asking for 20%. You know, it just shouldn't be. It should be fixed at the original dollar amount. But if this is in play where there was vandalism, then someone should pay for this. Whether it's a parent or somebody need to pay for it, whether they need to do community service, because $38,000 is a lot of money that doesn't warrant an arrest. So there's a loss to our school system. There's $38,000 that's going to fix an elevator that could have been used somewhere else. So I do echo Dr. Joyner with these 20% increases, and the policy mysteriously is not in play, that we should really err from coming to the board with 20%, or you'll just hear Andrea Downer keep talking about it, because that money could go somewhere else. And we have to stop this. Because if you ask me, it should have been fixed at the original amount, and that's it, not to exceed. Or we need to look at our vendors or look at who's over our fiscal budget. And I yield to Dr. Yarborough.
Thank you, Ms. Downer. Dr. Yarborough?
Yes, thank you. I bring up these topics at our finance meeting. I agree, Dr. Joyner, with what you mentioned, and I also agree, Ms. Downer, in terms of 20% not being the norm for a variety of reasons, as it pertains to, for a variety of reasons that have been mentioned. As it pertains to this particular item, I also inquired specifically what was the nature of the vandalism and what happened. And I also inquired about what are the ways that our students can be held accountable and really learn the impact, both financial and in terms of the service that the elevators to provide within a school, and just how we do that. So I have explored these topics in terms of putting them forward and asking our district leaders to think about that, because, yeah, I do agree. The 38,000 or however much the amount is could have gone somewhere else. And the reality is we also do need to pay the amount for the repair, so that those who need that accessibility do have it. So we are really put in a bind in terms of the process for having our district function, so that everyone can participate regarding accessibility and more, and also trying to recoup these costs. And ideally, our students and others who use the buildings will know that their decisions have great impact, and we definitely appreciate their citizenship as we take care of our district together.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Mr. Wilcox?
Yes, thank you. So just to add to what's been said, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I would just say that, yes, this is the item that was, a lot of these extra costs were due to vandalism of an elevator at Metro. It is unfortunate. It is, sorry, microphone issue. It is unfortunate that we have any vandalism costs, which we do when we have to pay painters. We need to, microphone cutting in and out?
Yes.
Yes, we cannot hear you.
All right, so it's unfortunate when we have vandalism in schools, so that we end up having to.
Can we change his mic or do something? We're catching like every other few words.
Mhm.
All right, we'll try this microphone number 3.
Much better. Mhm.
Hopefully this will continue to work. So I do agree that it's unfortunate if we have any vandalism costs, which we do. And this is certainly the case with this one. I would just remind everybody that the district does have a change order report that comes out in the first October meeting of every year. All of our change. Is it? It seems to be, this one seems to be, might be the entire system. But I just wanted to remind everybody, we do have change order.
No.
Year. And the final thing I wanted to mention is it was testified to in the Finance and Operations Committee that several of the contracts that the board just approved are coming in at higher amounts than last year because the district does look at the costs through the year and makes adjustments as they are awarding things moving forward so that the not to exceed contract amount can go up. So they do take a look. These, just as a reminder, these are the best guess based on, for a lot of these, based on what the costs are going to be. We don't know until the year actually happens if somebody's going to vandalize an elevator and goes, which was not expected. And but again, just in full transparency, they can look at the data every October. The last several years are posted in the meeting minutes for those agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Joyner?
I have a question about the October report. That's an ex post facto report? That is a report on the previous year. Am I to understand that to be the case?
That's correct.
That is the case?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, here's what I want to say about that. As board members, our job is to make policy. And I believe that given the chaos over the last several years, this particular board is doing a pretty good job of that. But we rely on the expertise and professionalism of the staff to give us accurate information at every step of the process when it comes to fiscal management. And we rely on them to make sure that there's transparency in bidding so that any reasonable vendor would have a fairly good estimate of what it's going to cost to do a particular thing. Vandalism is an outlier that we have no control over per se. And that's understandable. But based on what Mrs. Donald said, and based on my experiences working in school systems, we have to hold vandals accountable when we can catch them, which means that we need to make sure that all our cameras work. It also means that we need to be proactive, as Dr. Yarborough often says, about helping our students understand civility and the fact that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. If we have a beautiful school like Metropolitan, then any student or anybody that vandalizes that school is an enemy of the community. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. And vandalism is nothing new. We had it when I was a principal, a vice principal, a teacher, and so on and so forth. And we didn't have cameras. But we did hold the people that did the vandalism accountable when we could catch them. And to me, the worst thing that anybody could do in a city like New Haven, which is underfunded, and which opens its arms to anyone who wants to come here, is to have people in our midst that tear up those resources that we have gathered to help people overcome whatever disadvantages they have. And it's disgusting when anybody would vandalize a school. A school ought to be a sacred place. And the books in it and all those other things. And as a community, we have to take a stand against people who are trying to be destructive. And quite frankly, I don't even think there's any kind of restorative justice for people who plot to destroy property and persons. The only restoration would be if they would pay for it and vow not to continue to do it, but you can't completely restore that. So as a community, we have some hard choices to make about how we deal with this, because the worst is yet to come if we can't get a hold of these kinds of things that undermine our quest to educate and develop children. And I would challenge the students that come here and ask for this and that to use the influence they have with their peers and to recognize that if you see something like that's done, you're not a snitch, you're a reporter. You're a snitch if you're a part of it and you tell on your co-collaborators. And so I know that can get you into trouble, but in some ways, you have to figure out a way of eliminating or reducing the kind of mindless and reckless vandalism that plague not only our schools, but various other places in our community. And we have to deal with this. But I do understand, Mr. Wilcox, why we have this particular change order, because it was unanticipated, and we have to deal with those kinds of things.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner.
I yield.
Ms. Downer?
So I just wanted to add to, you know, what Mr. Wilcox said about the guessing of the amount. Regardless, this is my world. This is the forecasting world that I live in every day, where you have to be able to forecast the current and the future fiscal year. No, the guesses don't go up 20%, 50%, and it's a standard normal. No, it's not like that. If that's the case, then, you know, you're running a risk of putting this system in a great risk of financial turmoil. To always expect that. So yeah, there is a dollar amount and when to adjust to identify those future revenue and expenditures that need to come through this board. It's got to be reasonable and it's got to be just. So that's the stuff right there, because we have a problem and we need to be looking at things on a whole of everything. Any contract that we have, any kind of spending we have to look at that. So that's all I have, and I yield to Dr. Yarbrough.
Thank you, Ms. Downer. Dr. Yarbrough, and then Mr. Wilcox.
Yes. And yeah, I guess this should be my last comment, because I know this is not a place to have this conversation, but I like that we're having it. I think the other challenge, and I brought this up in a slightly different fashion, but for our finance committee, is that we also financially project towards a budget that has been slashed.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't approve for we can't contract for expenses beyond what our budget allows us to. And that really puts us in a conundrum, because we would say we know what the expenses are projected to be, but we also know that our budget has not grown that much to allow those changes. So it really does become a challenge. And I think we need to start tracking both. We need to start tracking, if we had a fully funded budget, what would it really look like to have expenses in these categories? And if we could contract for these, what could they be? Because I think I personally need that to remain in the forefront of my mind to see, are we just estimating off all the time? Or are we trying to correct for a budget that has not increased to the degree that we really need for it to increase? So that's something that I'm asking for, is just to help me to keep that in mind, so that I can see, you know, what we're actually doing. Because it is discouraging when we have change orders and other things that come up that seem like they're unexpected expenses. But maybe we can just help by having the funding we desire, and then the funding that actually is, and how our expenses are tracking against those. Thank you, President Rivera.
Thank you, Dr. Yarbrough. Mr. Wilcox?
Yes, I'll just follow up on our previous speaker, which is to point out that there is a serious financial problem in the district, and that is the district is not funded adequately to handle the costs that we have. And so we know we don't have enough math teachers, school librarians, school psychologists, and we also know we don't have enough money to fix elevators, paint walls, et cetera, in our buildings. So that's the big problem, is right there, is that when these things have to go through, they also have to fit into a budget which is severely underfunded. And so I just take issue with the insinuation that everything is suspect, without the acknowledgement that that is a huge thing that sits there. We are always going to have these issues until we're fully funded. And we may never be fully funded, because the United States doesn't want to fully fund their schools. So while I welcome all of this, and the Finance and Operations Committee will continue to do our due diligence, we will get any questions answered as best we can for anybody that has them. We will listen to any idea. We'd love to hear more, and we will get this to work. I also love the idea, similar to how we did our staffing guidelines report, to see what the gap was, the gap analysis between how many math teachers we need and how many do we have. I love the idea of a analysis of what do we need for our facilities, which would help inform these discussions moving forward. And so I'm going to work with the superintendent and the rest of the Finance and Operations Committee to find a time for that to happen, because I think that would be a wonderful thing to add into this conversation. Because as I recall, a previous chief financial officer said he used to spend on 10 or 12 buildings what we spend on 45 buildings in terms of maintenance and upkeep. And he was surprised that they were still standing in some cases based on that funding. So I will definitely pursue that idea. I think it's a wonderful one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox, Ms. Downer, and Dr. Joyner.
Mr. Musser
Dr.
had his
Joyner.
hand raised also.
Oh, Mr. Musser, sorry, I didn't see it.
Well, I do agree, Dr. Joyner, about student accountability. I do have to say that, I mean,
Your microphone is not working.
well, I do agree that in large part, student vandalism, student accountability has to be a factor. I do think too that in large part, it's also due to the fact there's a lack of structure in New Haven public schools. I mean, in my sophomore year, I had my American law classroom roof collapse and a year's worth of projects were destroyed. And when you have these sort of things happening consistently, it's just like, it kind of like brews chaos in a school. And so when we talk about, well, these people cannot, there's no restorative justice, we cannot reconcile them back into our community, I'll have to disagree with that, because this is almost at the fault of the lack of structure within our public school as a result of a lack of funding. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Musser, Ms. Donner, and then Dr. Joyner.
So I just want to add to it that we can't spend what we don't have. So if you're starting with $2, you can't come with a $2 million policy, a $2 million change order and all of that. So that's where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. There's got to be some kind of strategic direction to get out of this. Whether it takes getting rid of or bring it back in-house, bring our work back in-house. That's what it's going to take to get out of this. You know, a lot of people always say, well, oh, we don't, you may spend more, but guess what? You are spending more. You have contractors here. We got contractors acting like they Board of Education members and they work for the Board of Ed and they don't. We have our crews doing work. I'm pretty sure that we can find a way to get our crews to do the work, set up the structure, and so we can actually alleviate these high costs. Everything can't be vendored out. So we got a vendor here, vendor there, vendor here, vendor there. We're broke. If you ran your house like that, you will be homeless. And that's my only point here. How many vendors are we gonna have? You think you're not paying the vendors health insurance? You are. You better believe it. That's all I gotta say. We got too many vendors here. Too many. And they're not doing a good job of it. How about that? I can start with the schools and the conditions of the schools. It ain't all about vandalism. So let's start there. I'm not even gonna talk about the other stuff. Local 287 reporting to ABM. I'm not gonna talk about that.
You did.
but I yield to that, to Dr. Joyner.
Madam Chair, is it okay for me to speak?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Ms. Downer. Dr. Joyner? Oh, jeez. I just muted you, Dr. Joyner, by mistake. I was trying to take your hand down.
I know you're my friend. I want to make a couple of things clear. This is a pretty emotionally laden conversation. And that's okay, because it's very hard to speak about something that you feel deeply about without injecting some degree of emotion. But I want to agree with John Carlos about some of the institutional issues that we have regarding the state of our buildings, but that does not also mean that there are some people that we cannot help given our resources. I don't think we should be so naive to believe that we can restore everybody. We can't. We should restore as many people as we can. And whether or not a person restored or not, that depends on that person's mindset and willingness to accept the fact that they've done something wrong and that they owe a debt to the community in order to get back in the good graces of the community. There's not a single bit of research that says that restorative justice works in all cases. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try it, but restoration should depend on whether or not the person is habitual, malicious, vicious, and so on and so forth. And I know a couple of things you can't restore. You can't restore murder. You can't restore extreme sexual abuse. And so we have to accept the fact that there are a range of people in the world, and they range from extreme evil to extreme goodness. And we shouldn't be so naive to believe that we can restore everybody. I wish that were true, but it's not. And if you can find me some evidence to say that it is, then find that evidence for me. But you're absolutely right. We have two problems. We have the problems of infrastructure that is being degraded because we don't have sufficient funds for maintenance and upkeep, preventative maintenance. We have some organizational problems with people that work with us and run our buildings having to report to vendors. That's a real issue. And we're going to have to restructure that, because the people that know the most about the state of the buildings are the building managers. And 287 has some really good people that are New Haveners and families grew up in New Haven. They care about these buildings. They actually, I can document that sometimes they take money out of their own pockets to try to do repairs. And so we got it bass backwards if we allow a vendor to control repairs, diagnosis of problems, and so on and so forth. And quite frankly, I don't want to compromise anything, but everything starts at the top of the particular unit, and the person in charge of that unit is ultimately responsible for knowing what's going on in that particular unit, and for giving the superintendent a timely notice of challenges and problems. And then, of course, all administrative responsibilities are set at the foot of the superintendent. We're going through a special case of problems now that have nothing to do with Madeline Negron, nor do they have anything to do with Eileen Tracy. But I believe that we're going to get on the right road so that we can address these issues. But I'd also like to say that no one said anybody was suspect. I think what we talked about was a clinical description of the problems, what we believe to be the causes of the problems, and that we have to make policy changes and administrative procedural changes so that we can begin to put a dent into these issues. And the prime movers of the challenge that we face now, vandalism is a factor. Competency is a factor. Unfilled work orders are a factor. And as Mr. Wilcox said, all of that has a price tag. But some of it has to do with competency and ethics. And that's not saying anybody's suspect, other than the people who are incompetent and unethical. And we're not naming any names, but if that is the case, I'm sure it'll come out at some point. I yield my floor position.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Dr. Benitez?
Yes, I understand the concern about the change orders, but I want to make a point because I want to validate the comment that our student made about the structure and restorative practices. We have had buildings where that was done well. I want to say my building practice restorative practices. But the point is that that our student is right. There has to be a structure and there has to be the support for students to understand what's the expectation that we all have for them. But we also have to support them in learning those things. So we cannot expect children to do things that they may not be able to see in others. We at these meetings have to show our students how we can have conversations respectfully with one another. I am not singling out anyone. I think we all agree that there are some things that we have to fix. But the first thing we need to fix is to make sure that we respect each other. Students need to see that at the Board of Ed meetings. They need to see that among the adults who lead them. So I want to say that I do not believe that punishment has shown to help children grow, and that we have enough research. So I want us to understand that when we chose to use restorative practices, it was because we had examples of buildings where children understood the code of conduct and were part of decisions made for consequences, and it works. And children feel honor and have dignity when they make mistakes, because children do make mistakes like adults make mistakes. And I agree that we should all be responsible for what happens in our buildings. And if people knowingly do something wrong, they should take responsibility. But we also need to teach children how that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benitez. Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on change order 9.01.
Mr. Musser has his hand up.
Mr. Musser?
Right. On top of what Dr. Benitez said about, students taking examples from adults and treating each other the same way, I also think that because of the lack of stable infrastructure, students also in a way feel disrespected almost by NHPS, if that makes sense. It's like, it feels very hostile, and it just doesn't really feel like a community. Like, it doesn't feel like a community, basically. I mean, you have, again, like students who are trying to find bathrooms, like just simple stuff like using the bathroom or relieving yourself is that difficult. And you have probably 30 minutes a day just going through the school and just trying to open locked doors. It's very frustrating. And so as a result, you have a lot of students who already come from troubled households. I mean, 500 students in New Haven are homeless. How many of those students also come from very unfortunate situations? As a result, they come to school with already not the best mindset for learning. So when they come to school with not the best mindset for learning, and on top of that, a school which doesn't have the environment for learning, I mean, what are you really going to get? And of course, while I agree with you, Dr. Joyner, that some people cannot be reconciled, I can tell you that the vast majority of these students who vandalize can be reconciled within their community. And I do think that restorative justice practices can work, as I've talked to many of them. In my freshman year, I tutored a student who didn't know basic arithmetic. And while, he was a bit of a troublemaker, eventually he became a good student. But then I lost him my sophomore year. And this year, actually, I found him high. He was just high all the time in the hallways, outside of school. And it was just because of the lack of structure, I feel like. He had no support group. His home life, as he told me, wasn't very stable. And so I just feel like, when you need to have the learning environment stable first before you can really expect that much from students. Like, you can't have a lack of accountability for NHBS. Not saying that there's a lack of accountability, but saying there's like a bit of you're not like the infrastructure is obviously not being maintained to a degree that should be, and you can't expect students to also maintain their accountability to that same degree. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Musser. Mayor Elicker?
Thank you. I'm sorry to chime in because I know this conversation has gotten very long, and just remind folks that the specific item on the table is to increase the amount by $38,000 for this contract. But I did want to respond because there's been a lot of comments made and I feel a lot of passion, but I think we just need to be careful not to paint the district with a broad brush based on some incidents that occur that are unfortunate. There are thousands of students every day that do incredible work in the classrooms. There are hundreds of educators every day that put their all into our kids. I see that in my own personal experience with my daughters at their school and the educators. And I've had a lot of experience in my daughter's schools. Every educator that I have worked with in my daughter's schools are putting their all into our kids and deeply understand and working with some tough kids with tough personalities and a lot of home challenges, deeply understand restorative justice. And I know Dr. Negron and her team are working very hard to make sure that every dollar is spent correctly, that the Finance Committee, as Dr. Yarbrough said, tries to vet every item and spends a lot more time in detail. We're always working to improve, both on student accountability and restorative justice and on our financial situation. It's unfortunate when we have occasional circumstances where there is some issues with student conduct. But I think we just need to be careful not to paint the district with a very broad brush based on some smaller incidents.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Okay, seeing no further discussion, we will vote on change order 9.01. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarbrough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner, Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, and so that item passes. Mr. Wilcox?
All right, thank you very much. Going to make the next motion, and I request that if I could have the floor after, as per Robert's rules, so I could just provide a sentence or two of context. So I move that we approve change order number 1 to the contract with Compan for the Martinez Playground installation.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Yarbrough. Mr. Wilcox? Mr. Wilcox?
Yes, just wanted to clarify on this, that this is not to say that Martinez is not going to be without a playground for the entire year. This is the testimony we had in the Finance and Operations Committee meeting was that there would be about 17 weeks from when the vendor gets the final contract and can order the materials to when everything's fully installed for this and for the rest of the remaining 4 items here that I expect we'll be hearing update on the timeline for these installations at the next citywide Building and Stewardship Committee meeting in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Ms. Downer and then Dr. Joyner.
One thing that I noticed that was missing from every single change order from these was no change order in the amount of what is the dollar amount that we approved. That's missing. And then the materials, 17 weeks. And by the time the materials come, here we guess again, 60% change order because the materials are high. I noticed that it's missing on every single 4 of them. All 4 of the rest of the change orders have not to exceed. That's missing. And the amount is if already approved, it seems like they were just changing the date. They can't do it this month. So next month, it'll probably be escalated about 100%. So we just got to do diligence. This is called housekeeping here. Leaving it open for that change order to come again. So for that, that's what I would like to recommend, that the verbiage is put in place. So we don't get caught 17 weeks with a 60% to 100% change order. And I yield to Dr. Joyner.
Thank you, Ms. Downer. Dr. Joyner?
Okay, as I understand the change orders, there will be no increase in the price. But I think it should be very clear that there should be and not to exceed. I think we have to do a better job, and I'm not talking about the board. We have to do a better job of crafting our contracts so that we don't have any loopholes that will allow the kinds of things that that Mrs. Downer just mentioned. I think the other thing though is that we ought to know why this was delayed, because that goes back to something that John Carlos said about infrastructure. It's not only that we have to make sure we keep up to our infrastructure, but we also need to have timely delivery of that infrastructure so that the children that are going to benefit from that playground will be able to do it at the beginning of the year and enjoy it during the time proposed. So to some extent, that's a problem with a contract when you say you're going to start something on a particular date and you have to start it many, many days later. A good example is the field house. If we don't get the field house done by December 1st, that means that's a threat to our winter sports. It also will undermine our ability to generate revenue from the various schools around us and organizations around us that use that field house. So that's a management issue when you can't not only forecast costs, but forecast start and end dates and take into account all the variables and contingencies that could impact that. So we have to do better in that regard. And this is a little bit off this, but I think a lot of what was said in the previous conversation was misinterpreted. But that was a complex discussion, and oftentimes in those cases, people have an emotional response to it, and they miss the fact that two things can both be right, and that nobody's trying to demonize anybody else. But I think that's an issue when we have these large variances between when a vendor promises to start something and when they actually start it. And that, in my estimation, undermines the quality of the work and what we were contracting for. And if you ever had a home repair, or you have ever had to deal with an agency that says that we're going to start this September 1st, and then they call you later, we can only start November, then that can create a problem for you, and also impair the quality of the agreement that you had between the vendor and the person receiving the services. So I yield my time to the next person up.
Dr. Yarborough?
Yes, thank you. One's just a observation and then a suggestion to the points that you made, Dr. Joyner. So first, Mrs. Downer, to the points that you made, the original contract does say it's not to exceed order, and we're just changing the time for this. So the original contract is there and it says not to exceed. Dr. Joyner, to what you mentioned, I agree with you. And my observation is that I raised this question at our finance and operations meeting in terms of, what's the cause for delay? And also asked the question about, well, how long is it going to take for us to install this playground? Is that going to mean that our students are going to be without a playground for a significant period of time? And I try to distinguish between, is it the district? Is it the vendor that's doing something? Is it the district? Is it a hold up on our end, or what's going on? So my observation is that these conversations do happen in the finance group. I don't have many jobs, but I try to do the one that I do have on the finance piece. But it also sounds like the conversations are not getting to the rest of the board when we come to bring these when we come to vote on these items. And I'm just curious about either if there's a better way to incorporate the minutes, or to some kind of way have the district write out the answers when we raise these questions, so that there's an efficient way for the full board, when you review these items, just to see right there underneath the item what were the questions that were raised, and also how the district leaders responded. Because I do agree that these are very important questions. And a number of them I did raise and seek to clarify. So maybe I can work with Mr. Wilcox and the superintendent and just see if there's a way that is acceptable for us to get a summary of what was discussed on these specific items, and what responses have come back. And in a way where everybody doesn't have to listen to the hour or so finance meeting to get your insights addressed, because that's not efficient, not wise. But I did bring up because they're good ones. That's all, President Rivera.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Ms. Donner?
So I just wanted to say that I have in the past, and I did listen to the minutes, but because I have to ask Mr. Wilcox, who actually does get, when I did get my questions answered or asked, it take a long time for my questions to get answered, or sometimes not even at all. And that's the reason why I choose to ask the questions here, because I do have a right to ask the questions here. Maybe my questions didn't get answered. I mean, I do ask questions that pertain to a lot of things that don't get answered at all. And I have the email chains to follow. So I just wanted to say that. The other thing is we have 4 playgrounds, not let alone, we only got 1 pool up and running. So what do these children have to have for the summertime? These are in underserved areas. Where are they gonna go to the playground? So did we have any workarounds that can get these children to other playgrounds, other areas, other parks? Do we have those in place? That's all I'm asking right now.
Thank you,
And I
Ms.
yield.
Donner. Dr. Yarborough?
I can respond after, because I think those are good questions.
Go ahead, Dr. Yarborough.
One point out, I did add, the playgrounds are not under construction for 17 weeks. So the students do have access to the playgrounds. It's once the materials arrive that it's a shorter period of time. I think they maybe said 4 weeks or whatever it was, that the playgrounds would be unusable. But that's a very good question, because that is also my concern. What are our students going to do during the time that these playgrounds are under repair? So I think that's a good question.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Mayor Elicker?
Yeah, and just to add a detail, because one of the board members mentioned that there's no dollar amount for the original contract. In our board docs, there's an attachment that's right next to the agenda item that you can click on, and then it says the dollar amount because it has the contract change order. So for this specific item that we've moved on Martinez Playground, it's 200. Original contract was $248,836.13. And city playgrounds all around the city are open for the summer for kids, including splash pads.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Ms. Donner? You're muted, Ms. Donner.
Does it say do not exceed?
The original does.
Okay, that's the key there, because these change orders are atrocious. It's terrible.
Thank you, Ms. Downer. Mr. Wilcox, did you have your hand up?
Yes, so I just thank everybody for the constructive criticisms. I agree that having the verbiage for these items match the verbiage for the other items is a great idea. Thanks for catching that. And I know the administrative lead that works with our committee also watches this, the full board meetings, and I'm sure she's taking notes on that. Thank you for that catch. As you know, there's dozens of items on this longer list than usual, and we missed those. So I take responsibility for that, and thank you for pointing that out so that we can correct it moving forward. As has been mentioned, you know, there's no change in the funding amount. The amount is listed here in the backup documentation, but that doesn't mean that we can't do better next time. And I'll just put it back out there. If anybody has any questions, I do my best, and I know that Dr. Yarborough and President Rivera, also as members of the Finance and Operations Committee, try to do their best. I will never say, please don't ask questions in this meeting. Every board member has full rights. It's in our bylaws. I would never say that that is not something that should happen. I'm just saying that if we get stuff ahead of time, for instance, this right here, we would have had this corrected in the materials sometime today. So that it would have been correct before the meeting time, which is not to say that it shouldn't have been that way from the beginning. But I'm just saying that's one of those things that adjustments can be made so that information can be corrected up until just a couple hours before the meeting starts. So just moving forward, I appreciate everybody's help on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Okay, seeing no discussion, we'll vote on change order 9.02. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Abstain.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, and so that item passes.
All right, and
Mr. Wilcox?
I'm not requesting the floor back after I make the motion on these other ones. So, so I move that we approve change order number 1 to the contract with Compan for shades for the Mayo playground installation.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve change order 9.03. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Abstain.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, so that item passes.
So I move that we approve change order 9.04, a change order number 1 with the contract with Compan for the Brennan School playground installation.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Yarborough, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to vote to approve change order 9.04. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Abstain.
Ms. Downer abstain, sorry. Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well, and so that item passes.
And finally, I move item 9.05. I move that we approve change order number 1 to the contract with O'Brien and Sons for the Wexler Playground.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Yarborough, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve item 9.05. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
The question.
Dr. Yarborough,
I'm a yes.
Ms. Downer,
I'm not lowering my hand. You said any discussion. You didn't look up. I had my hand up before you started.
I did, but go ahead.
What materials are being delayed? Did they say all the materials? Sand? We have sand here in New Haven. So what materials are being delayed? Polymer, what? The swing set?
Dr. Yarborough?
Yes, I ask that if there's someone in the district who can answer that question, that we answer it. If there's no one that can't answer that question, if there's no one who can answer the question, that be said so we can move forward, please.
So no one can answer that question, Dr. Yarborough?
Hold on, Ms. Downer, hold on.
No, because I'm not done. I'm
Mr.
asking.
Mr.
My
Wilcox,
question was not answered.
we're trying to
Point of
get your
order,
question
point of order.
answered.
Someone answer my question.
Dr. Benitez,
Point
Ms.
of
Downer,
order, we
someone is trying
cannot
to
talk out
answer the
of
question.
turn.
I had the floor. So
We are trying to get someone to answer your question,
Right,
Ms.
but I
Downer.
wasn't done. I didn't yield. That's the point. That is the point. I didn't yield
That's not the point. You asked the question.
the question. I said, what
Dr.
was
Yarborough,
what was on delay?
Ms. Downer, you're out of order. You're out of order.
And you know what? You're out of order too, because I didn't finish
Mr.
my
Wilcox, did you have a response to the question, Mr. Wilcox?
As I recall from the Finance and Operations Committee meeting, it was not a question of sand and other materials not being available. It was having contracts and everything go through the proper channels so that things could be approved, so that the vendor would then be able to make the orders that they needed. That's my recollection from the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Ms. Downer?
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox, because that was my question. But if I feel like I'm gonna be attacked, then I'll take it. I'll take it for the team, because I'm here for the citizens of New Haven. I am the elected official here. So I didn't yield my question. So to actually say I was being disrespectful and I'm out of order, you're wrong. But I apologize if you think I was out of order. I wasn't done with my question. So I did hear Dr. Yarborough attempt to talk, but that doesn't mean that he didn't hear me not finish. I didn't say I yield. So I do want to say that. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. And I did clarify that. And no, I was not out of order. You didn't hear me yield.
Dr. Yarborough?
Noted, Ms. Downer.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote to approve item, that was 9.04 because we had started voting when I, 9.05.
9.05.
Yep. Mr. Wilcox?
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough?
Yes.
Dr. Joyner?
Yes.
Dr. Benitez?
Yes.
Ms. Downer?
Abstain.
Mr. Musser?
Yes.
Mayor Elicker?
Yes.
And I am a yes as well, and so that item passes. Dr. Yarborough, did you have your hand up for
Yes, I just
from the
want to
last
say,
time? Okay.
yes, yeah, it's a new one. Ms. Down, I just want to say that I also make it my point to make sure that you are heard. I'm the one who asked President Rivera to acknowledge that you had your hand up when it was a little delayed before she started the calls. So I do really appreciate our opportunity to participate in these meetings. And a couple of times I have called for you and for others because I know it's hard to actually see who wants to speak and contribute. So I just want to acknowledge that I am on your team because we are on the same New Haven Public Schools team. So I want to acknowledge that piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. And I agree. We're all on the same team. There is no one person. We're all making sure that everyone is heard, that everyone has a chance to speak. When I call on the order, I call everyone. If someone raises their hand that hasn't spoken, I prioritize that person first. I yield my time. This is the first time in this meeting that we're hearing it. Normally, when you stop speaking, I take that as my cue that you're done with your question. And we were trying to allow someone to answer the question. So it wasn't about not letting you speak or not wanting you to speak or ask the question. Everyone here can ask questions, as many as they want. We don't have limits to how many questions we ask or how many times we go around until we're satisfied with the conversation. Dr. Joyner and then Ms. Downer.
Here we go again.
Okay, so I'd rather have this conversation between people who are ethical and who genuinely care about the city than to have someone on the board who is simply looking out for their own best interest. And clearly, Andrea Downer is not looking out for her own best interest, but she's looking out for the interests of the community. And that's a good thing. And I think as we grow together as a board, that this will happen less frequently, if at all. And I certainly appreciate Dr. Yarborough, who I think highly of, and I think he knows that. It goes way back, in trying to bring some degree of understanding to all of this. We are in some difficult times here in the city and throughout the country. And quite frankly, despite some of the uncomfortable moments that we've had tonight, we're still not the House of Representatives, the current House of Representatives. We're still not a number of boards that I've looked at on YouTube. And we have a newly elected board member who's bright, able, ethical, passionate. And I can tell you, as someone who's known her since she was in the 5th grade, that she'll fight as hard for you as she will against you if she thinks that she's been disrespected or if the organization that she represents is at risk. I think that in the long run, that we're going to figure out the source of all of these problems that we're experiencing. And some of them go way back, years back. This is an accumulation of bad boardmanship over the last several years, bad management, as well as leadership from other sectors of the community that has not been what it should have been. I don't want to gum up the works by going back in time, and I won't. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We just have to be patient with each other, get to know each other and everybody's temperament, and also hear people out. Hear people out. And I think if we can practice the golden rule, that we should treat people the way we want to be treated, I think we'll be fine. I think also that we have to understand the tremendous complexity of the issues that we're dealing with. There are no simple answers to complex problems. And I think we're going to be better off in the long run. If you could just remember some things that have gone on the board in times past, this is an improvement. And I think we're going to get there. So I yield my time.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Ms. Downer?
So I just want to say this, the word yield was used by Dr. Joyner when we first started. It is a way to call for order when you have a meeting. It's very sensitive. This financial subject is so sensitive at a time like this. I did feel like I was disrespected, and I still feel that way, but I've accepted the apology. But to get up here and give a whole synopsis and not utter one word of accountability is just wrong on your behalf, Madam President. I also, you can shake your head, but it's just wrong. And I don't take that back. But I don't hold it against you, that we still need to move forward with what needs to be done. If it's gotta go ethical, it's gotta go ethical. But guess what? I will not be disrespected. I will speak for the community. I will. I will, if it's the last breath I have. You will always get that from me. But Dr. Yarborough, thank you. Thank you, and duly noted. Thank you.
And we'll move on to the students' report. Mr. Musser?
I would like to request some information regarding our contract with Blue Earth, the composting company we are under contract with. I would like to know how many tons of compost we get per year from Blue Earth, how much money we have with that contract, as well as how long that contract is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Musser. I see Mr. Wilcox taking note. I'm assuming that that information is going to come to you via email or a phone call.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Teaching and learning report, Dr. Joyner.
Okay, as you know, the teaching and learning meeting was scheduled for Juneteenth. And in honor of that holiday, I got a notice from Keisha, Ms. Keisha Red Hannons, that we should move the meeting. Of course, that was reasonable. And basically what we want to have as the agenda for the next meeting is we want to review the year's work to try to figure out what we did well, what we didn't do well, so we can do better. I can honestly say that that is a wonderful group of people. They work very hard, and she's a wonderful leader. And I think we've been able to work very closely with governors to try to get the priority policies on board. And I'm pretty confident that we'll have a lot of that stuff lined up to start the school year. And one thing that we have to help people understand is the whole question of literacy. People have a tendency to think about literacy as reading only, but literacy is content specific. And that's something that we have to help the entire learning community understand, that there's math literacy, science literacy, genetics literacy, which is a division of science. And that when we're talking about students being literate, the second phase of reading is reading to learn. And that means that you have to know the vocabulary of the particular content area that you're studying. And the other question of balanced curriculum. Learning to read drives initial instruction. Reading to learn drives instruction beyond the elementary grades when you've learned decoding. And that's something that we have to make very clear to everybody. Every subject in the curriculum is important. And we can't short shrift or shortchange other subject areas. And we have to educate the community to understand that in order to be proficient in the various subjects within the district, you have to be proficient in the vocabulary and language of that particular subject. And so we're going to have to make sure that our policies reflect that. And we have challenges at the high school level because we've invested a great deal of resources in having additional support for high school general literacy. But we also have coaches that are doing a great job, and they are necessary. But we also have to invest as much in making sure that in our science curriculum, our social studies curriculum, our math curriculum, that we have the kind of support at the high school level that can get the kind of proficiency in those content areas that we want for all of our students. And that's something that we have to work with the superintendent on. We have to work with building leadership on. I think that we're kind of losing ground when we don't insist that principals be instructional leaders. That is, at least generally understand instruction, how it's delivered, how it's assessed. I don't know if we're doing enough there. So those are some of the things that we're going to sit down with Dr. Negron and others to try to create a priority list of where teaching and learning will go next year. And we might even need a one-day retreat to go over some of those issues. But I've been very happy with the support of the leader in that department, Dr. I keep calling her Dr. Red Hannons, Mrs. Red Hannons. And what I try to do is structure the meeting based on the real needs of the district, not what I think is important, but what the real needs are. And so far, we've been able to do that. And I like to commend them for all of the work that they've done. The other part about literacy is for us to understand that we have multiple languages in this system, far more languages than we had 10 years ago. And when we were at the Hill House graduation, I was struck by the diverse group of students at that particular graduation this year compared to how it was even 5 years ago. And so that creates more challenges for our school district to be able to accommodate students that aren't just bilingual. We don't have a bilingual district anymore. We have a multilingual district. And that's a much harder challenge than situations where that's not the case. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I do believe we have talent and the will and the passion to make a difference. We're going to miss Pedro, but I believe that we have a great replacement, and I'm pretty optimistic about teaching and learning going forward, as well as the integration of effort between teaching and learning and governance. And of course, we have price tags for all the stuff we want to do. And of course, finance, facilities, and all the things that we talked about tonight. That concludes my report on teaching and learning.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Questions or comments for Dr. Joyner? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the facilities naming report.
I was actually looking forward to a very contentious discussion about teaching and learning, but we didn't get it. Teaching and facilities naming. As you know, on Friday, June 28th at 10 o'clock, likely from 10 to 11, no more than an hour, we will have one of our first dedications of a facility within a school. And I think we've had pretty good policy to cover that. Took a lot to develop that. And it will be the dedication of the Media Center at Clemente to Hazel Beatrice Pappas, who was one of the wisest members of our community, one of the most committed members of our community. And her family is coming here from Michigan, Mississippi, Georgia, Virginia to be at the Media Center, the Library Center. And I'm hoping that board members that are free would come. We won't keep you long. Even if you just want to come in, say hello. Her oldest living sibling is 99 years old. She won't be here, but the second oldest is 91. She'll be here. And that's Aunt Clara. And she will be giving remarks about her sister. The reason this is important is, you know, it is so important for us to know our history, our family history, our ethnic history, our history as citizens of this country and as citizens of the world. And I'm hoping that John Carlos can stop by as a student representative, because Ms. Pappas was born and raised in Mississippi. Mississippi was the most racist state in the Union during slavery, and I think that it probably is I probably shouldn't say this, but it's the truth, I believe. It probably has that honor, that dishonor now. If you look at the incidents that happened in that state, it had the most vicious slave codes, and the amount of atrocities committed against people, against Black people in that particular state was horrendous and continues to this day. Hazel Pappas came out of that environment, and she was a fearless immovable force in this community, despite the fact that she didn't have a PhD or a master's or even a bachelor's degree, but she made a big difference. And if you think about Mississippi, it produced Fannie Lou Hamer, who had a similar profile to Miss Pappas, and Myrlie Evers, and there are many other unnamed people in that state that made a difference. These are the folks that are the foundation of our democracy. So naming something that's already been named after Roberto Clemente, who's one of my personal heroes, naming a facility within that building means that Clemente has a proud heritage. And it should be a way of encouraging the children in that school to live up to that legacy. So that's going to happen at the Media Center. And we've gotten a lot of people to come in and lend their support to it. So I'm hoping that we can get more people. If there are people out there listening, I would hope that they would come through, as the kids say now, and be a part of this. And this concludes my facilities naming report.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Questions or comments for Dr. Joyner? Okay, we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Negron.
Thank you. Today, during the superintendent's report, want to provide an update related to our budget mitigation. I do have Chief Linda Hannans to support with any details needed. As many of you are aware, we have been working extremely hard. I think since end of January or so, to think about our budget for fiscal year 25. And we went through the process of holding community town halls, sharing the needs that we had to continue to run the district, keeping a close eye on providing teaching and learning to our students. And for quite a while now, we have been attempting to mitigate an 11.8 deficit with $5 million contribution that was already allocated in the mayor's budget. And thus, again, we were looking for that 11.8. What I have in front of you today is to tell you where we are at. We have continued to look at our grants to maximize and optimize the grants, inclusive of the increases that we know are projected to come our way. So right now, in terms of that mitigation, we are confident that we can find opportunities of $4.283 $757. Also looking at a 10% reduction in operations, we believe we could find about $620,000, with a percent also decrease in non-instructional materials, taking into account, right, that this year there were a lot of supports that we were able to bring in through our ESSER dollars. We believe we could reduce those by $500,000. You've heard me talk about our mitigation inside of transportation. We are hoping that after all of the routes are in terms of all the parents sending in their confirmation of school locations, that work tends to happen. Bus routes compilation tends to happen in early August. We are optimistic that we could, through our routes, be able to find $1 million in savings there. Through a 10% reduction in other contractual services, meaning talking to all our vendors, seizing opportunities where we can, we believe that we can find about $1.1 million there. We've continued to do realignment and reduction in staff. Again, the right sizing process that you have heard me speak about, which is combination of classrooms, not only in buildings, but across buildings, looking at our retirements and discussing, is that a position that indeed needs to be filled, or maybe it doesn't need to be filled? Looking at resignations, all of that work, we have found $1.9 million in that area. So I believe, because I've been very intimate and the team has been very intimate in this process, which I am grateful for, that we have looked everywhere and leveraging my learnings from the year that I have spent in our schools and working with teams. But right now, with everything that we've looked at, we still need to continue to mitigate about $2.37 million, because all of these efforts has been so that I do not have to be like my colleagues in speaking about layoffs. Everything that we have done so far, and again, I'm going to say kudos to the team. I think we've done impressive work, that we haven't had to lay people off, and that we have been able to mitigate that 11.8 to that 2.37. But that is the reality of where we were at with everything that we have done so far. So I will pause there for questions or comments.
Questions or comments for Dr. Negron, Dr. Joyner, and then Mayor Elicker?
Well, first of all, Dr. Negron, I'd like to commend you for, I want to make sure I say this properly, because I think people need to understand that both you and Dr. Tracy inherited a colossal mess. And I won't go into detail, but if anybody ever wants to talk to me about why I believe that, I think there's plenty of evidence to indicate that. Both you and Dr. Tracy were active leaders in organizations during COVID. And people that don't understand this business, you're making excuses. There's nowhere in the world that when you take over the helm of a district that has been chronically underfunded, and that when that district's survival has been compromised by a world-altering disease, that the person that takes on that task is really taking on something of monumental importance. And I would like to add to that we have a mayor who has also had to deal with the district plus the city as a whole. And what I believe is that because of the cooperation between you and Mayor Elicker, and because the board is moving in the right direction, that you are positioned to show maybe even the nation about how you deal with adversity. And I think one of the reasons that you were chosen to be the superintendent is because of your lived experience. You know, you weren't born with a silver spoon, and you overcame that. And I think that that's something that you don't learn in a university. And if we can all remember that we all came from challenging backgrounds, and that we have to come together to solve this problem, and that we don't need to point fingers at each other, but we also have to recognize that the people around us are either part of the solution or part of the problem. That includes students, parents, administrators, teachers, and what have you. That we have to rebuild this village in a way that is intellectually defensible, morally upright, and practical, and cost effective. And Mr. Wilcox is right in terms of the elephant in the room, which is underfunding. And that's really the story of much of our lives. But I have the fullest confidence in you as a leader. And once you get a chance to choose your own people in key positions and or develop the ones that you currently have, which I think you're doing a good job of that as well, then I think we'll be better. I wish I could say I think we'll be fine, but that's an issue that we don't have as much control over as we would like to have. But to the students, the less vandalism, the more resources we have to educate you. To staff, the more unified we are and the more we come together around this common challenge, the better off we'll be as a district. And to our board members, there's nothing wrong with being passionate and direct. We should try to get as much information as we can prior to a board meeting. We should try to provide as much information as we can to board members who are working full-time jobs and trying to do a full-time job as a policymaker. And so I am very proud of you as a leader. I think that you're very creative and resourceful. And as far as my own evaluation of your work to date, I think you've done a very good job. And I look forward to more good work in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mayor Elicker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a tough situation, as we all know, and I think that all of us want to avoid program reductions and layoffs. I also wanted to add to what Dr. Negron said, that Dr. Negron and I have talked about this a lot, just how appreciative we are of our state delegation, the state senators and representatives who have dramatically increased pilot and have also increased ECS, which has allowed us to last year increase the city's portion to New Haven Public Schools by 8 million and this year by 5. But obviously there's a lot more work to be done on all of us. Dr. Negron and I have been in conversations about a pathway to help close the $2.4 million gap. She and her team have obviously, you've all worked very, very hard to reduce the gap already, and I'm committed to working with her to try to do that, and identifying any potential avenues there may be. We don't know yet this year if we will have a surplus. We close out our budgets obviously at the end of June, but it takes some time for us to close our books and process that information. But in the past several years, we have had surpluses, so that could be an avenue for us to help. It's very important to underscore that we don't know if we have a surplus, and we would also need the approval of the Board of Alders. So that's a conversation that we could potentially have. There may be other avenues as well. But I think that we all can, be very clear that we want to avoid layoffs as much as possible, and we'll work hard to find a pathway to do so.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Mr. Wilcox?
Yes, thank you very much. The first comment I have is just, looking at the mitigation there, just what's represented in those numbers is just more cuts in programming, more cuts in having more people in the classrooms, more people doing the other necessary work. We already don't have enough people in so many key roles to meet the needs in the district, and this just means less. Cutting bus routes means longer bus rides, potentially. It means potentially people walking farther than they're walking. And then, people that are now on a bus would have to become walkers depending on how those routes are laid out. So this is just some of these examples of just what's represented in these big numbers that we're looking at. So it's depressing to be in this situation. It's also depressing that Connecticut decides this is how they're going to fund their schools. Every system gets the results it's designed for. And as much as people are working on making these changes, it's just, we just need to really work this year to increase those changes and to hasten them to help solve some of these inequities where we're spending $18,000 or $19,000 per year per student in other school districts in Connecticut We have far less needs in terms of students experiencing homelessness and multilingual learners and special education students. They're spending $24,000, $25,000, $26,000 per year. So they might be having different conversations than we have. So I guess my question is, because we need to have a budget in place, my understanding by July 1, and this is our last regular meeting. And so if we're going to vote on this adjustment to the previous budget that the board passed a few months ago, we'll need to vote to add it to the agenda. And if that's the case, my suggestion is that we require in this a mid-year examination of how the mitigation efforts are going, so that if we need to make cuts, there is enough year for those cuts to be effective. The danger with a budget like this is we might end up in a situation where we have to make cuts mid-year, because by law, my reading of the regulations is we are only allowed to spend what is allocated to us to spend. And if we need to spend more, we need to go back to the alders or back to our other funders like the state and request more. And if we don't get it, we are not allowed to spend the money. So we might be in a situation where we run out of funds in March or May of next year, which would be incredibly inconvenient. So my suggestion is that we target maybe first meeting in November, or have some system of regular updates as to how this is going, and that a lot of effort is still continuing to be spent on this, or the layoffs that everybody wants to avoid are going to have to happen, which is not good, especially mid-year when people don't have a chance to make adjustments to find other employment. So I'm in support of this, but it's very risky. But we do have a history of being able to mitigate these things. And I know that I'm hoping is that when the city and others are understanding where things are and they see the evidence of the hard work that's going in to find those remaining funds, and the promised work from the superintendent about looking at the schools and coming up with plans that are community-based to have the conversations of where the schools need to be and all of that, I'm hoping that we'll have time to either get more funds added or to make those adjustments. So I guess just to finish up is the question remains that I think we need to vote on something tonight so that there's money to spend on July 1st, which happens in a week. And if so, we'll need to add this to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Negron?
I also wanted to add, and Mr. Wilcox, thank you for raising the point of the need to have structures moving forward to continue to monitor where we are in the situation. I do want to share that the process that we have engaged for months now with the realignment and the right sizing, it doesn't mean that we're done. It means that I will continue to have structures in place in different departments that we are looking at to seize opportunities in terms of how can we better align in terms of roles that maybe have been duplicated over the years to see where the opportunities exist. But one of the things that we did learn about the right sizing process this year was because we took the time to engage with the unions, to collaborate with the unions, so that they were at the table, they were a partner in the conversations. I also want to have the time moving forward to continue to do the same process that we know works. Because we know things work when we're all engaging in conversations about the best path forward. So there's more to come in terms of right sizing in the other departments that we basically ran out of time, in addition to structures that are going to be put in place. To give you one, for example, every new position that comes about, every new vacancy that we are considering to fill moving forward, there is a structure where we have a team assessing that position to say, is it indeed needed, or are we being a little frivolous with our resources? Because those days are over. And I think that, I know my team fully understands the direction in which we're going, because again, we have been engaged in this process. So I do want to call attention to that there are things being placed in terms of the executive leadership to continue to look and filter every financial discussion that we are making. And I guess I seize this opportunity to tell the public that I do believe we are doing our due diligence, and that every time we bring something to you in terms of F&O, it's because we've done our due diligence in looking at what is needed to bring it to your attention. So we will continue to do so. We will continue to bring you the reports often so that we know where we are and that we can pivot at any time to ensure that we stay on top of the financial situation before us as a district.
Thank you, Dr. Negron. Mr. Wilcox?
If it's appropriate, I'll make a motion to add this to the agenda.
Second.
So I guess I'm
You have
asking.
who's gonna
Sure.
make the motion first? Yes.
Okay,
Yes, Mr. Wilcox.
I move we add to the agenda the approval of the 2024-2025 adjusted budget.
Second.
Been properly seconded. Any discussion? And the motion is to amend the agenda to include the item. So we need a 2/3 vote, so 5 out of 7 votes. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Abstain.
Mr. Musser,
Yeah. Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well, and so that item passes. Mr. Wilcox,
I'd like to make another motion. And that is
Go
that I move that we approve the adjusted 2024-2025 budget, and that we require an update to the board at the first November meeting on the mitigation efforts.
Second.
thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Yarborough, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote to approve the amended 2024-2025 budget and the request that at the first November meeting, we revisit. Is that
Was the requirement.
phrase it correctly? It's required. Okay. Any discussion? I'm sorry. We're gonna vote. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Abstain.
Mr. Musser,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker. Mayor Elicker?
Here.
Yes.
Thank you. And I am a yes as well, and so that item passes. And we will move on to the president's report. Dr. Negron, does that conclude your report?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. For President's Report, again, just another reminder, our next Board of Ed meeting will be at John Martinez School on James Street, and that's on July 8th. So make sure that you have the addresses for that and that's the place that we show up to. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, Head Start Report, Mr. Wilcox.
I'll be brief. We did meet on June 20th. There is no word yet on Head Start grant. Word will come when it does. We're in here. And our enrollment level is at 86%, most of which are the facilities, the satellite facilities are pretty much fully enrolled, and there is still space at the Mayo School. And that is for this year, and next year there'll be plenty of spaces most likely available throughout our Head Start system.
Questions or comments for Mr. Wilcox? Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Okay, Citywide School Building Committee report.
So this meeting ended up being canceled. The next meeting is July 11th.
And Finance and Operations. Might as well lump them together.
Finance and Operations, in addition to the many action items that we have previously talked about. We also had an update on the budget for this next year, which we just passed, as well as where we are with budget for the current year with our our May 2024 report. And we also have received word that as far as the procurement policy goes, meetings are happening this week between various city folks and the Board of Education. It's been challenging getting everybody together at this time of year, but I'm appreciative to staff for being able to do so. And I hope to have a good update at our July 1st meeting. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Questions or comments for Mr. Wilcox? Okay. Governance report, Dr. Benitez.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Board of Ed members, the public. We have been asking throughout the year for the support because we have lost our intern from Yale that who graduated successfully. She will not be with us this coming year. We do have a staff member who supports us and helps us direct our work, but we do need clerical support in order to make sure that documents are processed on a timely manner. And I continue to encourage the district leadership to find that person. I understand we are in a very difficult moment for me to continue to ask that, but there perhaps is someone in staff who is able to support Ms. Tiffany Jackson on the side of clerical. As a former staff member, I do recall that at times we would volunteer ourselves when we were able to support each other. I am not suggesting that anybody needs to do so and not pay attention to their responsibilities. But in fact, we do need clerical help in order to get this work moving. Thank you. Otherwise, I don't have a report other than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benitez. Questions or comments for Dr. Benitez? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the Food Service Task Group report. Dr. Yarborough.
Thank you. Yes, we met on June 12th, and among some items that were brought forward, one item that was also important is around our protocol and policy for food allergies. And what we discussed is that while there is a policy, we also need to make sure it's implemented in efficient, effective way. This is not the category that we want to slip up on because the consequences can be dire. And we spoke about making sure that there are feedback loops that are in place and that the participating partners, the nurses, the parents, the students, the food service team are all communicating in terms of their role in the policy to make sure that there are no loopholes and to make sure that appropriate meals are available at the schools for the specific students and that other needs are in place. And so between when we last met and when we are going to meet, they're going to review what's in place, what the loopholes are, and at our upcoming meeting, we can review the policy for our food allergies. So that's just one of the topics. As well, the community partners in the district continue to prepare for the gap between summer programming that will occur to help make sure our students and families have access to food. And as well, the district is preparing summer meals for when schools are out. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. Questions or comments for Dr. Yarborough? Okay, seeing none, that was the last item on the agenda. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Dr. Joyner? You're muted. I don't know if you're speaking.
I just wanted a 1 minute point of personal privilege to thank every single board member for the work that they do. I know that the majority of the board are full-time workers. Many board members are caring for their elderly parents and sometimes for their elderly selves. And I don't think the public understands in many instances how much of a sacrifice all board members make. A student, a young man who could be doing something else with his time, and he's at all of the board meetings, and he's also working in his school for change. And we're at a real tough time in our city, in our state, in our nation, and in the world. And we need more people like the people on this board, even though we disagree at times, and sometimes we get compassionate and all like that. But that's okay, because we're making a difference and we're giving of our time. And I just like to thank every single board member and every single staff member who are pointing us in the right direction and struggling mightily to make a difference. So thank you. And with that, I would move to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Thank you, Dr. Yarborough. And properly seconded. Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Yarborough,
Yes.
Dr. Benitez,
Yes.
Ms. Downer,
Yes.
Mr. Musser,
Yes. Yes.
Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
and I am a yes as well. Good night, everyone.